Hello, everyone. For those of you who have not met me yet, I'm Shannon Leslie. I'm the Director of Curriculum and Technology. That's been added fairly recently. And I'm here tonight to start the process of informing all of you about our ESSER III plan. And I'll get into a little bit more details about what that means through this presentation. There was an FAQ document included in your board packet that has quite a few details about ESSER III. And there's more information now on our huusd.org website, also on the history of ESSER, because this is the third round of funding, actually. So the history of ESSER is on there, as well as information that you're going to receive tonight. It's tricky with masks on. Oh, here we go. Do I need to start over? All right. Maybe I can go like that, and that'll signal to go to the next slide. All right. So since the pandemic has started, the U.S. Department of Education has rolled out several rounds of funding, actually. The first round of funding was known as ESSER I. And this was when schools suddenly found themselves in a very interesting position with the onset of COVID, and everyone went remote, and it was a bit nutty, to be honest. And so our country decided, hey, we need to help schools. And so the first round of funding was released. And HUUSD used this funding to help support our remote academy, which was our virtual learning option, increase our nurse staffing, put bus monitors on buses, start to look at HVAC improvements, all the things that we needed to do in response to the pandemic in that moment. Fast forward a little bit of time, and they released another round of funding known as ESSER II. And ESSER II was ESSER II came with a requirement of developing a recovery plan. And our recovery plan was, the timeline for our recovery plan was we had to submit it to the AOE last spring, and then it was approved, and we are following that recovery plan currently. And we're going to be submitting an update on the results of our recovery plan at the end of this year in June. In our recovery plan related to ESSER II are things like continued HVAC improvements, purchasing PPE. Bridget mentioned that earlier around the KN95 masks. Excuse me, hiring surveillance testing assistants, so that way we can have methods in place that allow as many staff and students as possible to stay in person. We also added some additional support staff, targeting academic, social, emotional, and behavioral supports for students, because it was tricky for many of our kiddos this past year to return from either a fully remote or a hybrid model to full in-person instruction. And so some additional staffing was put into place to help with those particular needs that students had. And now we are entering into what's called the ESSER III phase. And ESSER III is a much larger pot of money, and it's known as the American Rescue Plan. That's why you'll see it referred to as ESSER III, but also ARP, ESSER. ARP stands for American Rescue. And the rest of this presentation is going to go into details about that plan, because there are some requirements that come with ESSER III that did not come with ESSER I and II. There we go. So requirements around ESSER III. So in a nutshell, you can see there that Harwood, our district, has been allocated an amount of a little bit over $3.1 million. And where that number comes from is based on our Title I population. And these are students that receive free and reduced priced lunch. So there are, you can even go on the AOE website and look for, go on their ESSER page, and there's a document on there that you can see all of the Esser I, Esser II, and Esser III allocations across Vermont. And clearly there are some districts that are receiving a lot more money than Harwood, and there's also some districts that are receiving a lot less money than Harwood. And again, it depends on your Title I free and reduced population. Something called the period of performance is when districts can spend the money that they have been allocated. So our period of the period of performance goes back to March 2020, and it lasts until September 2024. So we can go back in time and look at things that we wanted to support with Esser III, but what we chose to do is mostly to look forward, and I'll be explaining that in a moment. Another thing to note is that we have spent our Esser I and our Esser II allocations. Those two pots of money are accounted for. We have not yet spent our Esser III allocation. And again, that's why I'm here tonight, is to share with you our plan for how we want to spend that money. So some other requirements for Esser III is that we do need to share a plan for our use of funds, and the funds must address very specific areas, and that is the academic, social, emotional, behavioral, and environmental safety needs of students. 20% of our total allocation must go toward providing academic support, and districts must engage in collecting feedback from stakeholders. And stakeholders include teachers, students, parents, community members, board members, our union, HUA, as well as stakeholders that have special interests, especially those that are interested in students with disabilities, homeless students, English learners, and other various student populations. So our plan is broken out by these required areas. And what you can see here on the screen is items that fall under the environmental safety bucket, items that fall under the academic bucket, and then items that fall under the social, emotional, and behavioral buckets. The asterisks next to several of these items, in fact, all but I believe 3, are related to strategies that we started using Esser II funding. And so the administrative team, we've had a lot of conversation over the last few months about preparing for spending our Esser III. And we decided, based on a needs assessment, that what we really need to do is continue many of these strategies that we supported under Esser II. And so that is the majority of our plan moving forward, is we would like to use our Esser III funding to continue purchasing PPE, to continue the additional custodial staff that we have right now, to continue having our nurse COVID coordinator, on staff subs, summer school transportation. And I'm not going to read all of the items because you can see them bulleted there. What we would like to add that is new and not previously covered under Esser II is we would like to explore the opportunity to look at a 7 through 12 PBL coordinator. Right now we have a PBL coordinator at the 9 through 12 level here at Harwood, but the education quality standards really stress that proficiency-based learning starts at grade 7. And we would like to investigate the opportunity to provide some enrichment, alternative. We're really in the investigation phase of that. Opportunities for students, bring that down to grade 7 and 8. And this would be a collaboration between Crossett Brook Middle School and Harwood Middle School. The other thing that we're adding that is new is you heard from the students earlier this evening about some of the stressors and issues that the high school is currently experiencing. And so we would like to add a wellness and restorative consultant, someone who can come into the high school and work with us for the next couple of years to help bring some best practices to the faculty and to the students to help with some of those behaviors and other things that they're seeing at the high school. And then lastly, the third thing that some of you might be familiar with, it was brought to the board, I believe, a little over a year ago for consideration, and that is a sound field project. And this Esser III would cover the equipment for that. The previous director of special services, Donna Ray Dawson, worked with several speech and language pathologists from around the district, and they brought forward a plan for expanding and purchasing the equipment that would be needed to increase the hearing capacity in classrooms and other spaces throughout the district. And so we feel that Esser III is a tremendous opportunity to get that project up and running. Next slide. So I'm sharing with you sort of some bits and pieces of Esser III, but there's quite a bit more detail to it than what I've explained here. And one of the requirements is to post our plan publicly, as I mentioned, and also an opportunity for the community and all of those stakeholders to provide feedback and let us know if we're moving in the right direction with our plan. And so if you go to the huusd.org website, on the main page, you'll see a button. It's yellow and it says Esser Funds. If you click on that button, it takes you to our Esser page. There's lots more information about the Esser funding, some of which I described tonight, but there's other information there as well. And then on the right-hand side, there's a list of some links to the plan itself, an FAQ, which is the same FAQ that was in your board packet, and then a link to the feedback form. The feedback form asks for some very specific information from people who fill it out, and we're going to be monitoring the submissions over time. And so the feedback form is going to ask for the person's role, whether they're a parent, a teacher, a student, a community member, and then there's a space for other, where people can better identify who they are and the reasons for filling out the form. And then the form goes on to list all of those strategies that were on the previous 2 slides that I shared or that you reviewed, all those bulleted items. Those are listed here on the form, and the form is asking folks to say whether they highly support, somewhat support, or do not support that particular strategy. And at the very end of the form, there's an open comment section where they can write a narrative providing any other targeted comments, questions, and also just some general feedback. Because there's a question around people's role, no names or email addresses are collected, by the way. This is an anonymous form. The only identifier that we're using is that role identifier. And that's going to allow us to disaggregate the feedback by role. And one of the requirements of our plan is to start to post that feedback by role right into the plan itself. So as this information gets out there and the feedback form becomes known to members of our community, they'll be able to go and start filling it out. And then as the form becomes more populated, then that information will be shared in our plan. And I can update you on when the plan is updated. And so where we are now is in the stakeholder engagement phase. And there's 3 phases that we're designing to move forward into. And so what's been completed so far is our ARP Esser III plan has been posted on the website, and the feedback form is there as well. And I'm here tonight to present to the board. What we're going to do moving forward is to continue with our stakeholder engagement. We're going to be announcing the plan in HUUSD bulletins and school-based bulletins. Administrators across all the buildings are going to be sharing the plan with teachers. Teachers will be sharing the plan with students in a way that students can ask questions and understand what the plan is about. The plan will be shared with union leaders. I plan to deliver some paper copies to all of our town offices, along with paper copies of the feedback form with envelopes and stamps and things like that, so people can return them, especially for those who don't have access to electronic devices, or they just find it easier to go to the town office and pick up a paper copy. The plan will be announced through various media sources, such as the Times Argus, Front Porch Forum, the Valley Reporter. And I'm going to be reaching out to any special interest or community groups. They will also be able to reach out to me, perhaps after watching this board meeting or going to our website. People will be able, I'm going to be reaching out through emails and phone calls to those groups around all of our towns and those groups in all of our communities to also share the plan and the feedback form to get some feedback from them as well. And then ongoing throughout that period of performance, which again expires in September of 2024, is if any changes happen to the plan, those will be announced, and we will be soliciting feedback every time that there's a change made. And we will be making changes based on that feedback. And we'll also be making changes based on the sort of the continued evolution of this pandemic. Because the decisions that we made about our Esser III plan were basically made on what we need right now. But those can certainly change. And schools are allowed to go and make amendments to their plan. It doesn't mean that once we submit this to the Vermont Agency of Education that, you know, they rubber stamp it and that's what you get. We do have to submit what we want to do right now, but we can go in and make changes in pretty much an ongoing basis based on the feedback that we receive and the changing nature of the pandemic. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
So the children that need like the after school tutoring, and how are those children? Are those children that are on like IEPs, or is that any children that might qualify for that type of service?
Yep. We identify students with the biggest needs, and each building does that according to their student population. And then those are the students who have been identified for tutoring.
Is there a certain limit, or is it based if as many kids that can have it as needed?
Yeah, I would say the limitation right now is finding the staffing for it. So I think that's been a theme throughout this pandemic, is that we have these positions available, but finding people who can staff these positions has been challenging. But we're continuing to work on that and advertise and whatnot. I would say that, or just add that tutoring is one component of our strategy. What's also listed here are interventionist positions that are working in buildings during the school day to spend the next 2 years really focusing on getting students caught up and continuing to strengthen our MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support, So that way, and this might be a question that might be lingering in the back of some of your minds, is that, well, what's going to happen to especially these positions that are listed here when the funding runs out? And we do realize that that's a big question. So what we plan to do as far as a strategy is to really leverage these positions for the next 2 years to try as best as possible to get kids caught up to a place where they would have been pre-pandemic. And we're going to truly try our best to do that. And what we hope we will be able to do is not wait until 2024, but beginning for the 20, so we're going into the 22-23 budget, but this fall, when we're planning for the 23-24 budget, is to parallel to that, start to draft a plan for offboarding many of these positions, because we do understand that they are expensive, and that's why we're using ESSER III as an opportunity to fund them. But we're also very cognizant of we need to be fiscally responsible and coming up with a plan for offboarding. So when we find ourselves in that last and final year of ESSER III, we're in a good place financially to be able to move forward.
I guess that was one of my questions, so thank you for that. But if, say, there's funding that goes unspent, do we anticipate just having to return that? Or
yeah, it's a Michelle can vouch for this too, but I think it's a use it or lose it scenario, which is true with all grant funding. We receive other grant funding on an annual basis, which I also manage, Title I, Title II, and Title IV funding. And it's the same concept. We receive a specific allocation each year, and you can budget for that total allocation or whatever money is left over, say in your piggy bank. Some of it, there's a little bit of carryover, but for the most part, it's a use it or lose it situation.
Till September of 2024 to use these funds. So that's 2 fiscal years, a fiscal year beyond the one we recently budgeted for.
Thanks so much, Shannon, and to the others who've put this together so far. And I'm excited to see what, the next stage is. I'm curious what, if any, sort of overlap or how the task force work on literacy and SEL that was put on pause has perhaps informed some of these plans or not, or if picking up those task forces is also something that you see happening with, say, a few of these positions.
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. The task forces, given that they were put on pause, we did consider the work that was started there. For example, the utilization of the DESA, which is our SEL screener, that came out of a recommendation from the SEL task force. And so part of our ESSER II money was to support district-wide use of the DESA, and that is also continuing with ESSER III. Again, we do have a plan for how to eventually absorb that into our local technology budget. And so that's an example of that. As far as the literacy task force goes, there is movement at the state level. They're about ready very soon to release their own set of recommendations. And so I've reached out to the previous members, a couple of the previous members of the task force to let them know that it's coming. And what we hope to do is reconvene a group with a focus on literacy, probably after the April vacation, to dive back into that. I also just want to add to that many of the things that were listed in our ESSER III plan were, I said they were a carryover from ESSER II, which ESSER II is connected to our recovery plan. And in our recovery plan were things like getting all schools using Swiss, which is a behavioral progress monitoring tool. Getting everyone using the DESA, which we administer the DESA 3 times per year. Just sort of identifying what programs that we can use that provide us some data to be able to understand where our students are at in this moment, and to make sure that all schools are using those programs to fidelity, and also following a similar schedule. So that was really a part of our recovery plan.
Really helpful. I'm also curious if there are, like, around the student engagement piece, plans to increase programming, or would even things like, pardon me, field trips fall under this, that would be, again, enhancing student, say, social emotional learning, but it wouldn't look like counseling. It would look like engaging students in, say, an arts activity or a physical movement activity.
Yeah, so what we have to do, and it's a requirement of ESSER III, is we have to connect it to COVID in some way. It's not as ESSER I and ESSER II were a little bit more flexible in what you could use that money for, but ESSER III is very specific. And in fact, when Michelle and I are going to start working on submitting the strategies for ESSER III, even the application itself is a lot more comprehensive. And we have to use language such as, you know, in order to ensure that students are safe and healthy and don't contract COVID, you know, money to be used to purchase, you know, KN95 masks, things like that.
So would something like a program that existed prior to COVID and was paused or halted during the pandemic, do you think that would qualify, or no?
I would say if you can make the connection between how it would help students socially, emotionally, you know, their academic performance, things that sort of they drifted away from because of the pandemic. If it's a strategy that helps bring them back, then it would be an allowable strategy.
I'm sorry. Was there any consideration for exploring the idea of summer academy being open to all students who felt, or all families who felt like their students could use that extra time because of learning loss, not just students that are on some sort of plan?
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit, but where we're at right now is with our new Mad River Academy, we're going into the 2nd year of that, which is really the first year of having one program that is aligned also with the Eagle Academy at Brookside to be able to service students. So we're sort of taking it like a step-by-step approach to get the academy model solidified and make sure that it's effective. And then we may consider expanding that. That would be a discussion that the admin team would need to have.
And then that would be possible for this summer, or would we be looking at the summer after?
It would need to be a summer in the future. Yep, we just solidified plans for this coming summer school literally like a week ago. And we're actually working right now on hiring a summer school coordinator because last year building principals helped to organize the program, and we're ready to hand it off to someone who can focus their attention and time to that.
Well, maybe a many-part question here. First question, which the rest will hinge on, are these union-oriented positions that are coming in that you're hoping to hire through the ESSER funds?
All of the positions that you see on that slide are currently filled. These are positions that we funded with ESSER II. So we have staff that are in those positions now, and we want to continue these positions for another 2 years.
then it's not an issue of recruiting new folks. And great, never mind then for the rest.
The wellness and restorative position that you're looking to fill for Harwood Middle, would you be also collaborating with Crossbrook as well? Would that person overlap in Crossbrook, or just focusing on Harwood Middle?
That would, for now, it would just focus on Harwood. And we're looking at it as a consultant, someone to come in a consultancy capacity. And hopefully we can learn a lot. So maybe, you know, that's another thing, is that some of these positions, we're hoping that we can learn a lot from them. And then starting in 2024, have some systems established across the school. So that way we can then become our own experts and be able to move forward without necessarily having a person in that position. So we're looking to establish those systems and those frameworks, and then moving from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Appreciate your time tonight and time that you and other folks put into putting this presentation together and sharing it with us.